take a
to the 15,300 people that came forward for testing in the last 24 hours to 8 p.m. We do want to see those testing rates go higher and stay high to give us confidence about the next decisions we can take moving forward. Pleasingly, there were only 5 cases of community transmission in the 24 hours to 8 p.m, all of them on the northern beaches and all of them obviously associated in one way or another with the Avalon cluster, and Dr Chant will provide some further detail around that. And whilst we're seeing the trends go the way we hope they do, there are still too many concerning aspects of those cases, and also of not really being able to identify what we call the intermediaries, those unlinked cases, for us to really ease restrictions in the way that we know the Northern Beaches community wanted us to do so. So firstly, I'll start to talk about New Year's Eve arrangements. As you know, previously we'd allocated spots along the foreshore for frontline workers from across the state to be able to come and enjoy the fireworks. Unfortunately, we're going to have to cancel that. We think it's too much of a health risk having people from the regions and from Sydney and from broader regional areas congregate all in the CBD, and the advice to date has to all of us been try to avoid the CBD. And so on New Year's Eve, we're going to say to those frontline workers we'd previously invited, we'll find another opportunity during the year to recognise what you've done. So on New Year's Eve, we don't want any crowds on the foreshores around Sydney whatsoever. However, if you have a booking for a restaurant or another hospitality venue, so long as the 4 square metre rule is in place and those venues have COVID safe plans and you have a permit from Service New South Wales, you will be allowed into those venues in the CBD. If you're someone who lives in the CBD and has some people over to your home, that is allowed, but you can't have more than 10 people in your home. So those restrictions that apply for broader Sydney apply to the CBD obviously on New Year's Eve as well. So unless you have a permit to go to someone's home with not more than 10 people, or you have a permit from Service New South Wales to attend a hospitality venue, nobody should be in the CBD at all. And that is our strong message. All of us, no matter where we are in New South Wales or Australia and the world for that matter, can enjoy the 7-minute display from home. And that is the safest way this year to enjoy the fireworks, or I should say from television, because you might be at someone else's home, and I'll explain what those restrictions are for areas outside the CBD. So to all the frontline workers who would previously allowed those passes to thousands of you, 4,000 or 5,000 of you on the foreshore, unfortunately we'll have to pick a different time, different way to thank you. But I do want to take this opportunity to say you're in the top of our minds and thoughts. We still have fireys from last year we haven't been able to thank properly, and obviously all our frontline health workers, teachers and police and other frontline workers we were going to recognise. We will do so in a different way during 2021. In relation to regional New South Wales, restrictions beyond the 30th of December remain unchanged. Remember yesterday and the day before Dr Chant and I had spoken about what things look like until the 30th of December. So for regional New South Wales, nothing changes, arrangements are the same. For Greater Sydney, nothing changes, the arrangements are the same. So on New Year's Eve, you can't have more than 10 people in your home, that includes children. So you can have up to 10 people in your home if you're from Greater Sydney, but no more than that. However, we are reducing outdoor gatherings to 50 rather than 100 across the board. When I say across the board, I mean Greater Sydney. So at this point in time, you could have an outdoor gathering of 100. We're reducing that to 50. So it means if you want to have an outdoor barbecue or an outdoor picnic, you can do so up to 50 people. But remember, that means you have to be socially distanced. And what police and our health authorities don't want to see is those groups of 50 suddenly converging and becoming hundreds. So we're okay with you, so long as you're socially distancing, having an outdoor gathering of 50 in Greater Sydney. But make sure that those groups of 50 don't converge, and within those groups of 50 that you have good social distancing, because what we don't want to see is too much mingling within households that aren't socially distanced. And that's the message for Greater Sydney moving forward in terms of the restrictions. For the Northern Beaches community, firstly, can we thank you all for your patience, and of course Minister Hazzard, who happens to be a member of the Northern Beaches community, will provide some further reflection and comment. But if you are in the northern part of the Northern Beaches and the northern zone of the Northern Beaches around the Avalon cluster, Unfortunately, the stay-at-home provisions will be staying in place until the 9th of January, and that's because of the number of active cases we have, the number of people we have in isolation, and the concentration of cases, and also the fact that we still haven't found the real root cause of how the virus actually got to the Avalon RSL. So for those reasons, unfortunately, the stay-at-home provisions will be in place for the northern zone of the Northern Beaches. However, on New Year's Eve, you will have some relief. You'll be able to have up to 5 people into your home, including children. But again, they have to be from the northern zone. They have to be from north of the Narrabeen Bridge and west and east of the Baha Temple. So please know you can have up to 5 people in your home during New Year's Eve, but they have to be from that zone. And outside of that, we're still going to allow you to have 5 people at public gatherings, outdoor gatherings, during the entire time until the 9th of January. So stay-at-home provisions that you're all used to now are in place, with the exception of New Year's Eve, where you can have 5 people into your home. But on every other day, you can have 5 people outdoors, but we don't want anyone outside of the household coming into your home apart from New Year's Eve. And can I be very clear about that? It's really important to keep households separate when we've got such a high concentration of cases, active cases, and also people in isolation, and that's just to keep everybody safe. And we appreciate the frustration that many of you are experiencing, but if we ask you to do the hard yards now, we're confident that we'll be able to regain normality much sooner than anticipated, given where the cases are going and how the strategy is actually unfolding. So for those reasons, the stay-at-home provisions in the northern zone will be in place until the 9th of January, with the exception of New Year's Eve, where you can have 5 people into your home, and also outdoor gatherings during the entire period until the 9th of January. You can have 5 people outside the home as well. In relation to the southern bit of the Northern Beaches, now I appreciate the southern part of the Northern Beaches doesn't have as high number of concentration of cases, so we are still going to have to ask you to have the stay-at-home provisions until the 2nd of January. On New Year's Eve, however, you will be allowed to have 10 people into your home, but unlike Christmas, those 10 people includes children, and it also means they have to be from your zone, from the southern part of the Northern Beaches. We don't want people moving in and out of the area for the next few days. We want to keep the areas separate to make sure that any untraced chains of community transmission have actually been clamped down, that any unchained traces or unlinked cases can be identified and those links eventually found. So for the southern part or the southern zone of the Northern Beaches, we're asking you to have the stay-at-home provisions till the 2nd of January. However, on New Year's Eve, you're able to have 10 people into your home from your zone, and outside of that until the 2nd of January you still can have outdoor gatherings of 10 people. So if you want to have a picnic or take the children to the playground or have a barbecue outdoors, you can have groups of 10 people. But again, we don't want to see convergence of those groups of 10. So that's what gives us concern. When too much mingling is happening between households, that's when the health experts get concerned about potential outbreaks of the virus. So again, we're deeply grateful for your support. We're deeply grateful for your patience, and we appreciate frustration levels are increasing, but this is to keep you safe and everybody else safe. And we're going to reevaluate on the morning of the 2nd what happens in that southern zone of the Northern Beaches beyond the 2nd of January. So our ultimate aim is to make that zone part of Greater Sydney as soon as possible. So we'll have a conversation with the health experts on the morning of the 2nd to see to what extent we can ease restrictions. There will be an easing of restrictions from the 3rd, but what that looks like is yet to be determined, and we'll know on the morning of the 2nd what the 3rd of January looks like for the southern bit of the Northern Beaches. But for the rest of us, there is a degree of certainty now moving forward. For Greater Sydney, nothing changes. For the regions, nothing changes. For the northern part of the Northern Beaches, nothing changes until the end of the 9th of January. And for the southern part of the Northern Beaches, until the 2nd, we're asking you to stay at home and keep the current arrangements in place, with the exception of New Year's Eve, when you can have 10 people from the region into your home. But we're hoping from the 3rd of January that you will feel some relief. And what that relief looks like, we'll be able to tell you on the morning of the 2nd. So we can confidently say that there will be some relief for you. The stay at home won't be what it looks like today from the 3rd of January, but to the extent of it, we'll be able to tell you on the morning of the 2nd. But obviously our aim is to incorporate that southern zone of the Northern Beaches into Greater Sydney as soon as possible, and that's the next logical step for us. But we'll want to wait a few more days to make sure the virus any unexpected consequences of the current cluster haven't emerged. Now, we appreciate, again, the sensitivities around New Year's Eve, so we're trying to be as generous as possible, but again, we don't want to create any super spreading events on New Year's Eve, which then ruins it for everybody across the state moving forward. Again, can I say to people, please reduce your mobility. Don't move around unless you absolutely have to. Don't travel around unless you absolutely have to. We appreciate people have made arrangements, and you can maintain those arrangements outside of the northern beaches so long as you're applying common sense, you're reducing any level of exposure, and you're being sensible about the way in which you and your family are COVID safe. I'll ask now Dr. Chant to give her medical update. Minister, he's almost a doctor. Minister Hazzard will comment on the northern beaches in particular, and then we'll take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Premier. So New South Wales recorded 5 new locally acquired cases of COVID in the 24 hours to 8 p.m. Of these, 4 are linked to the Avalon cluster, and 1 is linked to a previously reported case whose source is still under investigation, but that person lived within the Avalon Beach area. There are, so in summary, there are 4 household contacts and 1 case that was associated with a venue, the Rose at Erskineville. There were 9 new cases were acquired overseas, bringing the total number of cases to 4,683. The testing levels were moderate at 15,364. And can I please urge the community to come forward for testing? Having those high testing levels, those incredibly high testing levels before the Christmas period, gave us a great confidence that we were diagnosing cases rapidly, and it allowed us to better understand the scope of the outbreak. So can I urge everyone, including those in the northern beaches, in both zones, to come forward for testing with the most minimal of symptoms? But my plea extends across the state. Please come forward. It is critical to us understanding this current cluster. And it is also important to state that if you get tested today and you're negative, and you get symptoms or different symptoms emerge a week later, you need to get retested. Even a few days later, please get retested. It is critical. The test just tells you about your status on one particular day. It doesn't give you an indication or assurance that you're not going to be positive in the future. In terms of the venues and cases of note, I just wanted to again thank the community around the Belrose Hotel, and also thank that establishment for its cooperation in our investigations. But anyone who attended the Belrose Hotel at any time in December and had symptoms that could be compatible with COVID, we're asking you to come forward for testing. This is part of the detective work to better understand how the cluster has emerged in the northern beaches. The Belrose Hotel has not yet been linked to the Avalon cluster, but there are now 3 cases that have attended this venue: the firefighter I talked about yesterday, a hotel staff member, and a person who visited the drive-through. And so because of those investigations, and because one of those cases had a very early onset, estimated to be around the 10th of December, we are looking at the Belrose to give us some information about those potential missing links. I would also like to reiterate the fact that we do know that there were some exposures in the central business districts, so of the CBD, but the CBD more broadly. So if you had been in the CBD in that period, please again have a very low threshold for testing and come forward for testing. That will assist us in making sure that we haven't had seeding events outside the northern beaches. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry. I'd like to stress to all the residents across New South Wales that you should make yourself aware of the zone you're in. Effectively, we have the regional area, we have the Greater Sydney area, and then we have the northern part of the northern beaches and the southern part of the northern beaches. Each one has different requirements. I want to stress that the requirements are based on our health advice from Dr. Chant and her public health team. They're designed to keep us safe. They're not designed to be restrictive. They're designed to just make sure that we're all safe and we're keeping our families and our friends and our community safe. So please familiarise yourself with the restrictions that apply to your particular area. For the northern beaches, can I say that obviously as a local, I want to emphasise that it is so important to the residents of the northern zone and the southern zone that they keep within their zones. It is crucial that you do not leave those areas unless you really have to and unless it's authorised by the public health orders. Can I say, even if it is authorised by the public health orders, unless it's crucial, don't move out of the zone. Stay in the zone. One of the factors that's been raised with me is that some people in the northern zone think that they can go shopping in the southern zone. Well, technically you might be able to. Practically it is extremely dangerous for you to do that in the current situation. So my request, my imploring to residents of the northern part of the northern beaches is go shopping locally, shop locally. You've got plenty of shops there. You've got Warriewood Square for the bigger requirements. But you can certainly get everything you need north of Narrabeen Bridge. For those in the southern zone of the northern beaches, again, you've got shops locally everywhere. You've got also the major Warringah Mall. If you're looking for fish, you can go where I go down to Harris Farm at North Manly. But stay in your zone. You do not need to get out of the zone. I want to stress that New Year's Eve is going to look a little bit different for residents, particularly on the northern beaches. But, as the Premier has indicated, there will be some capacity to have some people come to your house, 5, including children, in the northern part of the northern beaches, and 10 in the southern part of the northern beaches. Many of us who would be having friends around might be thinking about doing the cooking or the food preparation ourselves. I would encourage you to think about if there are businesses in your local area that are going to provide takeaway, think about getting a takeout for New Year's Eve, because there will be businesses hopefully that will see the opportunity to be able to not just give takeaway coffees and what have you, but also look at what they were doing in previous periods in the phase that we've had this last year, and that is providing takeaway food. So I encourage businesses to think about that. That is, make available takeaway food for New Year's Eve and the celebrations surrounding that. But also I encourage locals to think about getting I suppose the takeout message is get some takeout. If the local businesses are providing it, that will keep our local businesses supported. Finally, I want to say this. 1 January, I have spent time with our tracing teams, and the frustration that they have in not being able to track who has been where is just enormous. That puts us all at risk. As of 1 January, all businesses are required to have the Service New South Wales QR code. I want to stress that you have a quieter period right now to get on to doing that, and you need to do it. Quite apart from anything else, even if you don't want to do it out of goodwill, there is a $5,000 fine attached if you don't have those Service New South Wales QR codes by the 1st of January. So I stress both from the sense of goodwill and fellowship to your community, get it done, Service New South Wales QR code, but if you're not so inclined to be that way, then there's a $5,000 fine on the back of it, so please get on with that right now. Thank you.
Dr. Chant, could we just clarify the case of the hotel worker at the Belrose Hotel? Do you believe that worker is the earliest known case involving the Avalanche cluster? How sure are you? And what are you doing to try and go back from there?
Look, we're also pursuing other people as part of the cluster that have had early onsets of illness. Can I just say this is quite challenging because, as you know, the symptoms of COVID are quite mild, and so if someone's feeling a little bit of a fatigued after a long shift at work, is that COVID or is it not? So, but we are following up a couple of other people that might have had early onsets, but that also hasn't led us anywhere. So this is the sort of strongest indication because we have both a good history from both the person and supported by a mother, and also the issue that the laboratory testing on the serology very much shows that it's consistent with a 2 to 3 week prior to the person being tested. So again, those two pieces of information really are quite strong and justify the focus we're having on the hotel to look at find the links, but also to just be sure that we haven't had any other established chains of transmission. I would want to say thank you to this young man, and also acknowledge that his level of cooperation has been great, but also the fact that, just to confirm, he hasn't spread it to anyone that we know about his close contacts, but obviously we take a precautious approach, and we know there were some positive people around. He obviously got it from someone, and because we don't know who that was, we need to be careful in that broader community around that Belrose Davison area.
Do you think he's picked it up at the pub?
We don't know. Obviously that's one line of inquiry, and that's why we're asking anyone who's been in that pub since the whole of December, remembering the 14-day incubation period. If he got sick around the 10th, it's sometime before that. In terms of early December, he got it sometime in December. He's likely to have been exposed to it.
Chant, how many unlinked cases, mystery cases, are there now? And how does it compare to the Crossroads Hotel cluster in terms of, how worrying it is in how many cases can't be linked?
So let me just talk about unlinked cases, because I think that we just need to run through that, if that's okay. So there are some unlinked cases associated where people are actually residing in Avalon Beach. They may have gone, or Palm Beach. So they're residing in that area where we know there were lots of positive people around. We haven't managed to pinpoint them being at a particular venue or setting or crossing over with a known case. But we know that there is community transmission, or was community transmission, for a period in that area, just because of the vast numbers of people that were positive that were present in that area. Then there are cases that raise more concern, which are those cases that we actually don't know, that weren't related to the northern area of the Northern Beaches. So there, I think I went through them yesterday. We have got the gentleman from Bondi, and we did have an expert panel meet yesterday afternoon, and they've indicated that they can't exclude that the diagnosis in that case. And so the case, as well as their contacts, will be in isolation, and will be managing that as if it's a positive COVID case. We will be doing some further blood tests on that gentleman, and that will occur just again to help us clarify the diagnosis. But the experts have said we've got to treat that as a case, and we are. And can I extend my appreciation to that case and also the contacts? So there's that gentleman. There's also a gentleman that's gone into Manly and is works in an educational facility in Manly. We again are tracking down whether there was crossover in train routes, or if how he got into his work, and also looking at whether there are any colleagues that might have been from the northern end of the Northern Beaches. So that's still under investigation. We've got the gentleman that spent some time in the CBD, and I think I've mentioned on a number of occasions the fact that there have been a few infectious cases in that sort of Chifley Square MLC area, and that's another case that is unlinked. Obviously the 20-year-old we don't know the source of, and the firefighter who I mentioned yesterday.
So would you say that this has been more challenging in terms of contact tracing compared to the Crossroads Hotel cluster, or what are your thoughts in comparing the two?
Look, I think we've actually learnt a lot. The teams have actually learned a lot from the Crossroads time about COVID and how it spreads. I think it's been great to have the QR codes and some of those systems in place. We've also, I just want to acknowledge the community. So whilst we did see very high levels, and again the southwestern Sydney community was just superb in response to Crossroads coming out and those queues, I still remember them. We've seen a similar response in the Northern Beaches community, very high rates of testing. And again, that gives us confidence, because it means that we really know what the status of people are more rapidly. I've talked to you before about the fact that getting people tested as they go into isolation is really critical, because it buys us time in doing that further contact tracing. So for me, it's a very different situation, but equally as challenging. And I think you can see now that the context we're in, where we have no community transmission, in many other states and territories, and we had achieved no community transmission, it means that we're in a setting where we really want to work hard to get to no community transmission. I think it's important to know that when Crossroads occurred, at that time there were large numbers of cases in Victoria, and hence that posed additional challenges where, notwithstanding borders were introduced, no border is an absolute barrier. We have to have people travelling for critical reasons and essential reasons, so there was always a risk of a reseeding event. And now we are, as I said, working as hard as we can and working with the community and business to achieve that no community transmission.
So you can't link the Belrose Hotel with the Avalon cluster specifically, but you're still confident that they go together, that there is some...
We will be awaiting the genome sequencing, so that gives us one other piece of the puzzle. So if the genomes all match, then again that tells us it's associated with it. But what we're trying to do with our epidemiology is just find who spread it to whom in a nice linear line. But as I said, there was clearly some evidence of cases in that northern beaches area, in the northern area, where there were geographically linked cases that hadn't crossed over with positive cases. But that's, to be perfectly frank, not unexpected, given the number of cases in that geographical area.
Dr. Chant, was it the right decision to open the beaches in that southern zone of the northern beaches, considering we saw so many people there yesterday?
So just to be clear, outdoor environments are actually much safer than indoor environments. We have asked people to put limits on gathering sizes, and we do ask the community to take sense, keep away from other groups, household groups. It's actually better for household groups to be spending time outdoors than indoors, and we know that household like contact is the greatest. So we are trying to balance everything, but the message is, please, even over the New Year's, if you can actually eat your New Year's celebrations on an open veranda, outdoor barbecues, please keep people out of indoor spaces, and if you are in indoor spaces, please wear a mask in those settings where you're travelling on public transport or in other settings.
Can I just ask, just to clarify on New Year's Eve, obviously we're talking about the CBD and the full thing, but there's other areas you have in North Sydney.
Perfect, yeah. I forgot to mention that actually, so good question. We're saying to local council areas or local government who may have organised events for New Year's Eve, unless it's controlled, ticketed and seated, we don't recommend those events going on. Now, Health had already provided that advice to local councils, so some of the functions that have been organised in the suburbs and in surrounding local council areas had already managed to have events which are ticketed, seated, controlled, with good records of who's coming in and out. Now, if the councils can guarantee that, that's a matter for them, but certainly we can't guarantee that in the CBD, and we don't think it's safe to have so many people congregate from all over the state in the Sydney CBD, given what's happening, which is why we've abandoned our plans in terms of any foreshore viewing of the fireworks from the Sydney CBD, so that won't be allowed. But certainly if councils can guarantee a ticketed, controlled, COVID-safe event with people coming in and out, and many of those events are family-focused and finish at 9:30 or 10 o'clock, Health is still okay for that to proceed, but please make sure that it's extra COVID-safe. So again, if it's a controlled, ticketed, seated event, with good records of who's coming in and out, and also staggered times for people coming in and out. I mean, it's almost difficult to say this, but often getting to and from an event is more risky than actually being at the event, because you don't want large numbers of people all arriving somewhere at the same time, all departing at the same time. So we want any local government areas who are considering continuing their events, their community events, to make sure they consider staggered times for coming and going. They make sure that it's sitting. We don't want, no matter where you are, as difficult as it is on New Year's Eve, mingling, singing, dancing, these are all highly contagious ways of spreading the virus. And Dr. Chant can speak at greater length and greater expertise than me, but please know that singing, dancing, even speaking loudly and mingling really accelerate the virus spreading. And we ask everybody, please be sensible this year. We know it's not the New Year's that all of us hoped it would be, But that's okay. We want 2021 to be much better than 2020. And for 2021 to be much better than 2020, all of us have to be that extra COVID safe. But we are giving direction to local government areas outside of the CBD to say those events can continue so long as they respect the various per person requirements, the outdoor settings, obviously, no indoor settings, controlled seated ticketed events with good records of who's coming in and out.
So why allow groups of 50 gathering outside, obviously not at those ticketed events but elsewhere? That seems quite risky and sort of against the advice.
Well, no, actually it's consistent with the health advice. It's actually the health advice, and I would prefer Dr. Chant to give that answer to make sure people know we've based that on health advice. Outdoor settings are safe so long as you maintain social distancing and so long as the groups of 50 don't converge with each other. So we've reduced that from 100 to 50 for Greater Sydney. Obviously on the northern beaches it's 5 or 10 depending on where you live. So can I be very clear about that? On the northern beaches you can't congregate outdoors in groups of more than 5 or 10 depending on where you live. In Greater Sydney it's 50, and obviously for the regions they don't have any of that impost. But I will ask Dr. Chant to talk about the group outdoor gatherings of 50 and why that's deemed to be safe under certain circumstances.
So the risk was much greater. Say you had, for instance, 6 people in your house and you were permitted 10 visitors. That's a large number. Indoor environments are particularly risky, so by the time you have a long duration of time indoors. Outdoors, so what we want to do is to some extent incentivise people to go outdoors, and so if you can have a barbecue or go to a park, or you've got an area a reserve, that is a safer environment than having people congregate. This is a balancing risk, and we ask the community to be sensible. We are saying that at this time, wherever possible, if it's not important to you that you have a large event, please defer it, delay. That would be my message to you. But if it is important to you, then these are the rules, and please try and stay outdoors, maintain that social distancing. But my other message is, if you have the mildest of symptoms, do not attend any of those events, whether they're indoors and outdoors. The last thing you want to do is be responsible for spreading COVID to your loved ones and the broader community.
So about New Year's Eve. So we're still going to have the green and the yellow zones in place, but the people in the green zone, the only people that will be allowed in there are residents and people who have a restaurant booking and have a permit. Is that right?
That is absolutely the case. You cannot come to the CBD on New Year's Eve unless you have a booking from a hospitality venue, but even if you have a booking, you have to get a permit through Service New South Wales to prove that you've got that booking. So you have to go to Service New South Wales if you expect to come to the CBD. So all hospitality venues, though, can I stress, will be subject to the 4 square metre rule, not the 2 square metre rule. When we first announced this, obviously that was different, but all hospitality venues will be subject to the 4 square metre rule in the Sydney CBD, outdoors and indoors. That means you need a permit from Service New South Wales to prove you've got a booking at a venue, and if you live in the CBD, you're allowed to have up to 10 people in your home, but those 10 people have to have a permit through Service New South Wales, and you need to log in. If you live in the CBD, you need to log in with Service New South Wales and provide the names of the 10 people coming to your home. We apologise that we have to be so strict, but this is to keep everybody safe. You can't just, because you feel like it, jump on a bus or a train and come to the CBD on New Year's Eve. That's not the go. You have to be going to a specific location or being a resident of the CBD. Again, apologies for being so strict, but we want to make sure that we don't have a super spreading event on New Year's Eve, which then spoils it for everybody across the state. I'll get to all of them, don't worry.
Yeah. There are a lot of other spots around the harbour foreshore, for example, on the northern side, where there might not be ticketed events, but usually families would go and pack out all of the parkland surrounding the foreshore. Now, will that be allowed, or are you...
Well, that's why, similar to the question we received before, the only way you will be allowed to access those commonly frequented foreshore venues is if there is a formal event or formal level of organisation provided by the local council. So if the local council deems it appropriate to have a ticketed seated, controlled event, you will be allowed to participate in that. But you cannot just, unfortunately, pick up and go along to those frequently attended venues without being part of an organised, ticketed, controlled, seated event. And those areas are obviously controlled by local government. So we've sent strong direction today, and will be, to local councils saying you can only allow public access to those areas if you've got an event that's ticketed, controlled and seated and has good records of people coming in and out. So if you can satisfy those COVID-safe regulations or COVID-safe plans, you can proceed with the event. But our strong advice to families and communities is we cannot have people congregate in those large numbers we normally see along those foreshore areas. We do recommend very strongly that people watch the fireworks on TV or go to a local venue outdoors which is not on the foreshore and doesn't have that cramped crowding. So we're just asking everybody to be safe and use their common sense. And can I say what makes our team New South Wales, incredibly proud is that people have been demonstrating in the main good common sense. Yes, there are exceptions, and it's so annoying and frustrating when we see people doing the wrong thing, but they are the exception. The vast majority of our residents are using their common sense, being COVID safe, looking up the regulations and the advice and following them. And we ask everybody to apply that same level of common sense on New Year's Eve. Now, we have been very strict with the CBD. We've been very clear on what we'll be allowing local councils to do, but at the end of the day, it's their call. If they can't manage a COVID safe event, I'd recommend they don't proceed with it. It's better not to if you can't guarantee a COVID safe event, it's better not to proceed with it, but that's a matter for them. But we do ask them to review their plans, and if they have any questions, they should contact our health experts, who are always available to provide advice on those plans. Do not think you can come into the CBD unless you have a permit. Now, this makes the job of our police much easier, but it also means police, and I say this to businesses because we know you're doing it tough, but this also means there's more police freed up to monitor compliance. If you're at a pub in the CBD on New Year's Eve, you cannot be standing up and mingling, and there'll be more police presence to ensure that we don't have a super spreading event. So we appreciate what New Year's Eve looks like. If you don't feel you can adhere to a COVID safe New Year's Eve in one of these venues, we'd prefer you didn't turn up, because police will be out in force, and rather than have to police thousands of people on the foreshores, we will be asking police to have extra compliance responsibilities on New Year's Eve to make sure all businesses and their patrons are doing the right thing. The vast majority are, but we just can't see scenes of people, especially after having a few drinks, just getting up and mingling and deciding they want to give everybody a kiss and a hug on New Year's Eve. As difficult as that is, we ask people to refrain, because that could be a super spreading event, especially in the CBD.
And Premier, for the restrictions on the Northern Beaches, given that it's allowing 10 people to gather outdoors, this could lead to, are you concerned that this could lead to a number of people all going to the beach, everybody in parks, all on the waterfront, and therefore having a lot of people?
Well, that's why we've said already, and if you note, some weeks ago we'd already launched our plans for a COVID-safe summer. So we're asking specifically social distancing. Everybody knows the 1.5 metre distance, but also that the groups of 10 on the northern beaches don't converge with other groups of 10, and that's really the important message. We are allowing outdoor gatherings of 10, and as Dr. Chant says all the time, outdoor gatherings are much safer and less likely to transmit the virus than indoor settings. So if the weather is fine and you want to spend New Year's Eve outdoors, that is recommended. We only insist that those groups of 10 don't converge with each other, so that you have a massive number of people all mingling together. The key issue is to reduce as far as possible, and Dr. Chan, interrupt and correct me at any stage, but to reduce as far as possible households mingling with each other. Obviously, when you live in the same household, you're with each other all the time, but our aim is to have as little household interaction with each other as possible. Try and reduce your activity as much as possible, but we're also realistic and we appreciate what time of year it is, and so what we're doing is providing a safe way that you can enjoy New Year's Eve without risking transmission of the virus or transmitting it to your loved ones. I mean, I worry about that all the time, and as I think I've mentioned a few times, I haven't hugged my parents since February. That's just me. But everybody will make their own assessments about how they treat the vulnerable members of their family, how they conduct their own activity, what changes you might make to your plans. We've tried to provide, this is the balance, we've tried to provide as much notice as possible, but also make the decision as late as possible so that we have the best data available. And given the information we have to date and the risks that are posed, we believe the settings we've put in place are the safest for everybody. I'll come back to you in a second, sorry.
2021 is fast approaching, and you have previously said that all hospitality venues and also hairdressers will be asked to use the Service New South Wales QR code. Just to clarify, does that mean it will be mandatory?
Yes, so what we are saying that from the 1st of January, we want there to be compulsory use of the New South Wales or the Service New South Wales app when it comes to QR codes. So just to explain, until this point in time, we had given businesses the option of using their own QR codes or using the Service New South Wales one. But as the Minister for Health has highlighted, as has Dr. Chant, that hasn't always given our health officials the best and most accurate information to make those contact tracing phone calls or to push out those SMS messages.
Why is that?
Because unfortunately, the Service New South Wales app, firstly I'll say the Service New South Wales app is more accurate because you only have to put in your details once, and every time you go into a venue you just click on the code and you're automatically checked in. For the businesses that aren't on that app, you've literally got to put in your details every single time. People get frustrated, don't fill out all their details, or else they make stuff up. They don't talk about their dependents. But the Service New South Wales app is easier to use for us, and it's more accurate because you only need to put in your information once, and you can, obviously we rely on that. But we found those venues that use the Service New South Wales app has made life so much easier for our health contact tracers. This is to help our contact tracers who are working 24/7. Can I stress that? I'm not just saying it, it's the truth. Our contact tracers are working 24/7. Some people are getting results from tests from labs or getting calls in the middle of the night because this is a 24/7 operation to get us to where we are. And their job will be made 1,000,000 times easier if businesses get on the Service New South Wales QR code system rather than their own choice. And that's why it is so important. We've given businesses plenty of time. In fact, I'm told that it takes about 3 to 4 minutes tops for a business to download the Service New South Wales app. And as a user, I don't know about all of you, but for me, it's much easier going into a venue that has a Service New South Wales app because all you do is literally click on your phone and press a button as opposed to having to put in your details every single time you go to a venue. That is why it's really important for businesses to get on board because it means the contact tracers, those health experts that are working around the clock, can be assured. Imagine, I'll give you another example to demonstrate why this is so important. If we have a venue where there's, say in Greater Sydney, where there's 200 people, even if 150 people have done the right thing and 50 people haven't, that's 50 people out there with the virus potentially spreading it around and not knowing it. But if you have a Service New South Wales app and everybody and the person, the COVID safe marshal at that restaurant says, or the venue says, can you show me the tick before you walk in? You know that everybody in there has been logged on. It takes health minutes to get that message out to everybody who was there at a particular time. Now that increases the accuracy and our ability to get control of the virus. But even if a couple of people don't do the right thing and they have the virus, they could be spreading it in the community without knowing. And that's why it's so important to have the Service New South Wales app. We did try and give it a go by giving businesses the option, but we found the inaccuracy or the lack of consistency compared to the Service New South Wales app is too much. The gap is too big, which is why now we need everybody on the Service New South Wales app. It only takes a few minutes, no excuses. So we're encouraging businesses to think about that and be ready for 2021. Sorry, you were next. Yeah.
Can we have more details just on the latest COVID death? The man in his 70s. Is it being considered a COVID death?
I will ask Dr. Chant to provide information on that. All I know, it was a case from back in March, but I'll allow Dr. Chant to. Yeah.
So this was a gentleman in his 70s who died on the 21st of December from respiratory complications following a COVID infection diagnosed in March. He was a household contact of a locally acquired case, and although his death is considered to be related to COVID, so that's based on the doctors completing a death certificate as to the cause of death, he had recently tested negative and was no longer infectious and posed no risk to the community. And I think this highlights the fact that sometimes the complications can be so severe that the lung damage and other complications arising from COVID, that can subsequently be the cause of death many months later.
What area was he from?
Look, we're not releasing that information. specifically, I will check with the family. We obviously want to protect the family's privacy. This is a very difficult time for them. It was a locally acquired case. And but look, if we are able to give out any more information, we will do so. No, it's not linked to the Northern Beaches.
Will he be included in the toll?
Yes, he will be included, and I think in today's press release, the numbers have increased to 56.
It's on the southern zone of the Northern Beaches. There's obviously been a bit of pressure to ease those restrictions. Can you explain why you can't ease them or won't look at it till January the 2nd?
We are pushing to no community transmission, so we are wanting to stop this COVID in its tracks, and therefore we need to be very cautious. We know that the northern end of the Northern Beaches is an area where there is much greater risk, but we also have many contacts that live within, close contacts, that live within the southern end, and we also know the way that movement comes up and down that peninsula, there is a lot of mixing of people from within the northern and the southern zones in the usual course. So when we haven't identified all the routes of transmission in the northern, the concerns we've got is that those people may have come into the southern. It's really pleasing to see the high rates of testing, and that's given us a lot of confidence that we're not missing too much disease, but we really want to get not risk any loss of control of this COVID response. So I just want to say thank you to the people of the Northern Beaches. I know we've been asking a lot of you at this time. We've tried to modify some of the restrictions to allow you to enjoy those outdoor environments for exercise and recreation. We're urging you to come forward to get testing, and in terms of the southern zone, the more testing numbers I can see, the greater confidence we'll have that we're not missing undiagnosed disease, and then that will inform our advice to the Premier on the 2nd of January, the morning of the 2nd of January.
Do you have any advice for people in Greater Sydney who spent time in that southern zone over the Christmas period? Should they be following those stay at home as much as you can orders and instructions?
That's right. So anyone who has been into the zone, who spent Christmas, and we know that many people, again, a big thank you to everyone. The feedback I've had is many people chose to limit their gatherings or to not have people in from outside, even though they were permitted to do so. Everyone who has spent some time in there needs to be cautious, particularly if the family you visited experiences any ill health. In terms of COVID symptoms, please, as a precaution, isolate yourself until that person has a negative result. It's incredibly important that we do all we can to achieve no community transmission.
Can I just clarify on New Year's Eve? I'm just thinking there are probably hundreds of parks and vantage points, Vaucluse, Drummoyne, North Sydney. We're talking a lot of people would normally be there. So whose job will it be to enforce no one's to go to those areas? Will councils have to fence them off?
Well,
police patrol? What will it look like?
Can I be very clear? There will be obviously the local spots where ordinarily thousands of people would gather. Now that can't happen. So most councils, whether it's the Inner West, North Sydney or other councils or Waverley Council, had already put in plans to have controlled COVID-safe events. Even councils like Fairfield Council at the showground had already organised to have COVID-safe, seated, controlled events. Those events can still proceed so long as they stick to the rules, so long as there's good record keeping, so long as they're controlled, seated and ticketed events, and that people stagger the time they come in and go out, and that's up to the councils to monitor. But if there's a local park or a local venue that some people go to look at the fireworks or to have a picnic, that is okay so long as everybody is COVID safe. If it's not the regular big foreshore area, but you might have an oval, sometimes there's ovals across Sydney which might have access to viewing, that is okay so long as you stick to groups of, depending on where you are, gatherings of no more than 5 or 10 if you're on the Northern Beaches. Larger ones are allowed in Greater Sydney, but please exercise common sense. What is a concern is when the various groups converge and form big groups. We don't want to see any of that. But we just ask you to exercise common sense. If there's an oval at the end of your street which people normally go to and you can maintain social distancing, stick to the COVID rules, that is okay. But for the larger venues, the foreshore venues where thousands of people would normally converge with no social distancing, that is not on. And councils are already putting COVID safe plans for New Year's Eve. We ask council to refine those plans, to update those plans, to get in touch with our health authorities if they have any concerns. But those, I think we can all tell the difference between those major areas where thousands of people would normally converge versus the local park or the local oval that might have access. We just ask people, there's always a degree of common sense. I think people know themselves when they're doing the right thing and when they're not. And yes, we ask for everybody's cooperation. We've tried to make the rules as black and white as possible, but we also appreciate that it comes down to common sense and it comes down to locals knowing their own local community. But can I stress Dr. Chant's advice? It's much safer to be outdoors, socially distanced in the group number you're allowed to have rather than being indoors, because indoors is where the virus is more likely to spread. And can I also say to everybody, when the clock ticks over to midnight from the 31st of December to the 1st of January, I know that's normally an emotional time where we like to kiss and hug everybody around us. Can I just ask for absolute restraint? Obviously your household is okay, but please be restrained, because the more restrained we are at midnight, the better 2021 will be for all of us. And can I please thank everybody involved in dealing with this current outbreak. First and foremost, the public. The public has been amazing, especially in the Northern Beaches. The testing rates have been beyond our expectations and we need to maintain them. Especially over Christmas, they've been phenomenal and we want to maintain them. Can I thank the public, especially the public of the Northern Beaches, for your cooperation and your support? Can I thank our health workers, the people taking the swabs, the pathologists, our amazing contact tracers, and also the associated organisations like the Police Force, Service New South Wales. It's really been an ongoing team effort and it's been really great to see how we've managed the first couple of days when we were all worried about where this was going to go to where we are now, and we don't want it ruined at the last minute. And can I also please extend my deepest condolences to the family who lost their loved one today from the virus acquired back in March. First of all, it shows how lethal this virus is and how our thoughts and prayers have to be with people who are really suffering during this time, especially this time of year. So my strongest message is common sense also needs to prevail. Yes, we've got the rules in place. Yes, we've got the health orders in place. But there's also a degree of common sense and restraint. I know we're capable of it because I've seen it in bucket loads in the last little while, and I just ask everybody to continue that because it makes everybody's job easier and it also gives us the best chance of having a much better, and believe me, we all need a better 2021, I think.
If we continue to see those large parties in the eastern suburbs like we have in the last few days, is there a chance that you'll make a snap decision and revert some of these restrictions to keep people safe?
Look, nothing we do is a snap decision. Can I say that everything we do is considered? But those visuals that we saw were people doing the wrong thing, and police will be out fining in force. Now, we never want to use that as our first option, but people should expect police to be out there in force. And I think all of us have had a gut full of people doing the wrong thing because the vast majority are doing the right thing. Thanks, everybody.
Mr. Hazzard, could I just ask you briefly about that house party at North Bondi? And we've now found out that one of the people that was at Bronte then went on to an over-the-top gathering in Centennial Park. What do you make of the 15 pins that police have handed out since Christmas?
But clearly that's a matter for police to determine where appropriate penalties should be applied. But I would say this, that when most of New South Wales, indeed most of Australia, is doing the right thing, I would just say to those people who are half contemplating doing anything stupid in the next few days, forget it. Because you will be the one who will end up being fined massively, but you may well end up being the cause of a super spreading event, and then you will really regret it.
Minister Hazzard, just quickly, now that will be mandatory for the Service New South Wales QR code, what are the fines for businesses?
The fines are generally $1,000. They can be higher though. They can be, $5,000 I should say. $5,000, I said that before actually, $5,000. What I would say is that the Premier's given very good examples of why it's critical. I'd add one more that some of the tracers were telling me, and that was that some of the businesses, when they were contacted, simply didn't know how to get the information off the platform provider, and that caused massive problems in delay. So there are a whole lot of reasons why 1 January businesses should have a COVID-safe plan, but also have a Service New South Wales app. And if they don't, they run the risk of a $5,000 fine. That's how to keep people safe. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.